Okay, let's get started. Thank you all so much for being here. Really excited to kick off this series on mapping out your MBA admissions journey. This is part 1 of 4. So welcome. You are probably already familiar with Target Test Prep's test services, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But I do want to call out that you have the opportunity to try the GMAT program for 5 days if you have not signed up already. So with that in mind, let's get to tonight's content. I am going to talk all about the MBA admissions journey, particularly the things that you can be doing this month. I'm going to keep admitting people as we proceed through the first few minutes of the program. So thanks for your patience as we get started. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Laura Nelson. I have a BFA from Carnegie Mellon University where I studied art. And I'm also a full-time MBA graduate of the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. I was a member of the admissions committee there, and before business school, I worked in film and television. So I had a very non-linear path going into business school and coming out of school. Following graduation, I entered the tech industry for over a decade, where I held general management roles, and most recently was the VP of marketing of a software startup. My last 2 companies exited through acquisition. I've been an MBA admissions consultant, though, for 15 years with 2 of the top consulting firms and now with Target Test Prep. I've steered hundreds of MBA clients to top programs. Additionally, I'm a member of AGAC, which accredits its members, upholds ethics in MBA admissions, and gives us direct access to admissions committees. Next week, I'm traveling to Europe for our annual conference. We'll be in Barcelona and Paris. We'll be meeting with programs based there, but we'll also be meeting with 30 admissions directors from top programs around the world. So I'm so excited to bring those insights to you next month's webinar. Over the course of the last 15 years, I've worked on almost every program imaginable, including full-time, part-time, executive, online dual degree options at top programs like these, along with many others that are not on this list. So that's a holistic overview of where I'm coming from and the experience that I'm bringing to tonight's conversation. So now that you've learned a little more about me, I'd love to learn more about you. So in the chat, could you share a little bit about where you're coming from, maybe your pre-MBA career and what you're hoping to do post-MBA? I'd love to get a sense of, the variety of people that we have in today's webinar. Give you a chance to do that. Again, if you're not familiar with the Zoom, feel free to use that chat tool. And a little housekeeping note on chat is that I will be monitoring chat throughout this presentation, but I do have time for Q&A at the end. So if your question does not get answered as I work through the presentation, there will be time at the end. Additionally, this is being recorded, so you will find this on YouTube after the presentation if you missed, a few minutes or you want to review it again. Oh, so lots of variety here in where people are coming from. We've got entertainment as well. That's awesome. Financial services, commercial banking, consulting, marketing. So we see a mix of classic pre-MBA careers in addition to some career switchers just like me. Love to see it. That's what I love about this process is there's just so much variety. A product manager, awesome. Financial analyst, going into investment banking, credit underwriting. Great variety here. So thank you guys for coming. So here's an overview of what our 4-part webinar series is designed to do. We're going to help you map out progress to complete your applications by rounds 1 and 2. The milestones we're looking at tonight will primarily map to round 1. However, you can adjust these activities as you see fit if you're waiting until round 2. If you're starting on the process now, I highly recommend that you try to apply to at least a couple programs in round one, if possible. The early bird truly does get the worm in this process. As you know, the MBA application process is long, daunting, complex, and the road to submitting your applications is anything but straight. This is a really tough process to face alone, and I wouldn't really recommend it. The highly competitive MBA process requires a bit of introspection, reflection, communication, and a high degree of EQ, among other things. So my job here is to help break this down into smaller pieces for you and hopefully make this process easier to tackle. So tonight's agenda, let's dive into it. Here are the things that I plan to cover. So first, I'm going to cover key milestones in the MBA application journey. In other words, if you're applying in round one, what are the key activities you should be doing and when should you be doing them? Next, I'm going to talk about what admissions committees are looking for. What are the key criteria for your MBA application and what's most important? Third, I'm going to talk about school selection. So a big part of your success in the MBA application process will hinge on your ability to select the right programs for which you're well suited to earn admission. Then I'm going to talk about diagnosing and addressing perceived weaknesses in your application. I'm talking about this now in May because you have a few months to address them. If you wait until August, it is too late. Finally, I'm going to leave time at the end for your questions. Again, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat as we go along, but if I can't keep up with it, please ask again, and I'll leave plenty of time to take your questions at the end. So let's get started. Let's start with those key milestones in the MBA application journey. This is how some of the key activities for your MBA application process correspond to each of the months leading up to round one applications. They also happen to be the exact topics we're going to be covering in each of the webinars leading up to those September deadlines. So if you're interested in joining us on this journey, be sure to sign up for the remainder of the webinars once the invites go out. If you're on the list for this one, you'll get the invite. Today, we're going to be focusing on the activities in that yellow box. These are the activities you can and should be focusing on now as you develop your MBA application strategy. You might have noticed that programs have not released their applications for next year, but there still is plenty that you can be doing in the meantime, especially if you're aiming for round one. So the activities we'll be focusing on today include these key milestones on this page. And if it helps you, by the way, take a screenshot of this page because we're going to be talking about understanding the admissions process. We're going to walk through key components that admissions committees at top programs evaluate and which materials cover them as part of your application. We're also going to be talking about identifying your target programs. I don't recommend you take shortcuts on researching MBA programs. If you're not going to be informed going into the process, you might be targeting the wrong schools altogether. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with diagnosing those potential problem areas. So again, we're going to cover the components on all of these components on this page in our webinars going forward this spring and summer. So I hope to see you there. But first, let's tackle this holistic admissions process, right? This can be a big mystery for a lot of candidates, especially early on where you might be in the process for preparing round one, right? It's important to understand this as the candidate because you can more effectively position yourself, as a strong applicant to these very competitive programs. You may have heard this already, but admissions officers take a holistic approach to evaluating your application. They're looking at your past achievements and potential in these three areas, including your academic capabilities, your professional potential, what you've achieved, but also what you can and will do next, and your personal narrative. And this is kind of a catch-all for not only how you tell your story, but the things that you're involved in and passionate about outside of your professional career, like your extracurriculars, volunteering, and how those take shape and form your perspectives. So these facets of who you are can and will be expressed in numerous ways throughout your application. I'm going to dive into these one by one here, starting with academic capabilities. So when an admissions committee member evaluates a candidate's academic capabilities, they want to understand the following things. Now, first and foremost, can you handle the rigor of the MBA program, particularly those quant subjects? Also, what is your experience with quantitative and analytical topics, academically, professionally, or otherwise? You need to demonstrate your academic capabilities and potential in your MBA application. And here are some of the key areas where they can be achieved. You're going to share your transcripts from undergrad and another grad program if you've attended one. You're going to share supplemental coursework like a pre-MBA course if you take one, or MBA math. You're going to share your test scores, of course, the GMAT, GRE, or EA. You're going to also discuss your quant and analytical projects, professionally or otherwise. So these all come through in your resume, essays, and or your recommendations. There's many areas where you have the opportunity to demonstrate your academic capabilities and potential. And if you're lacking in one of these areas, we'll discuss that at a later point. But let's move on to that professional evaluation. When an admissions committee member evaluates a candidate's potential, they want to understand the following. So, how have you driven impact in a professional setting? Also, importantly, when have you demonstrated leadership? But take note that leadership isn't necessarily managing a team or having direct reports. Next, what are your professional goals and how do they relate to where you are today? So many candidates to top MBA programs have an average of 5 to 6 years of professional experience. Where does that put the average candidate? So you're far enough in your career where you've proven yourself, right? You've had some wins, you've demonstrated potential. But in most cases, you're not far enough where you've figured everything out. You're not running the whole company in most scenarios. And the admissions committee knows this. So that's why we're talking about professional potential here. It's important to leverage application materials to discuss where you've driven impact, and this is a strong indicator of that potential. Your task with the application process is to describe your achievements and your professional plans, and there's numerous places where they will be described in your application, including your resume, short answers, essays, recommendations, and in your interview too. So take note, you're not going to necessarily be using all of these aspects of the application to describe the same things. It really depends on the format of that application, right? The types of questions they're asking in their essays and the short answers and so forth. So that's where you're going to have to really be strategic in the process. Let's talk about that third area that I called personal narrative. So when an admissions committee member evaluates a candidate's personal narrative and story, they want to understand the following. How do your interests and experiences make you unique? How have these experiences shaped who you are? And how will you uniquely contribute to the MBA cohort? It's no mistake that these opportunities are similar to what you saw on that last slide. You can share your personal interests and potential to contribute to the MBA program in all of these areas. However, again, every application is different, so it's really going to depend on the structure of the essays, that application itself, as to where you are going to express your personal interests and contributions. I provide this quick overview just to highlight how some of these aspects of the application can come together to help you, the candidate, highlight what's important to the admissions committee. So you'll hear admissions committees say there's no scorecard for how you'll be judged as part of the admissions process, and each component of your candidacy is going to be carefully considered. Business school admissions, it's not as cut and dry as other programs like med school and law school. Those programs tend to be a lot more metrics driven. MBA admissions committees are definitely interested in meeting the whole person. So your stories are really important. Hope that makes sense to you guys, but happy to take questions on this evaluation and this holistic overview in the Q&A. So I want to leave us a lot of time to talk about school selection. This is a big one. There are so many great programs out there that can help you reach your professional goals, along with your development and your personal goals too. I don't discount that at all because this is a big part of your life. It's a big investment. It's definitely worth taking the time to explore the options and how they can facilitate your career and your development goals. If you're dead set on one program, I highly encourage you to widen your lens a little bit, as you'd likely be a fit for more than one program. I think it's really risky to put all of your eggs in one basket unless you're willing to apply and reapply again until you get into that program. And of course, there's no guarantees. So for example, last season I had a client who was dead set on attending Kellogg. She had a great GMAT. She had great grades. She worked at a blue chip bank. She had really solid extracurriculars, and she was a really great fit for Kellogg, metrics wise and culturally too. Of course, she didn't apply to just one program. She applied to 6. The only one that she didn't get into was Kellogg. She was heartbroken. She had other acceptances from Booth and Haas, but the upside to all this is she's going to be attending Harvard Business School this fall. I illustrate this all to say, be open to the possibilities, right? You might be an amazing fit for one program, but this process is subjective. It doesn't always go your way, even when it should. So things change from year to year, and you need to expand your options, especially if you're really intent on starting school in the fall of 2025. So let's dig into some of the key considerations when evaluating MBA programs. They're going to include these 6 areas: admissibility, professional goals, curriculum and programming, culture, environment, the alumni network. And these are really key criteria that you should be evaluating and scoring, right? Not all of these are going to be the same weight in your evaluation, but these are things to keep in mind as you narrow down your list. Take note, I didn't include price or affordability on this list. So all of the top MBA programs, especially in the US, but certainly in the world too, they're all really expensive, and cost should definitely be a consideration, especially if you don't receive a scholarship or some form of financial aid. So you should definitely look into which of your programs offer funding for your profile. And that is a conversation that's really specific to an individual situation, sponsorship, funding sources, and more. That said, many programs award financial aid to the general applicant pool. So your job is right now in this part of the process is really just to put your best foot forward to earn those scholarships. Affordability definitely becomes more important once those admits start rolling in. So I want to dive into details on each of these areas, starting with admissibility, right? And the core question we're trying to answer here is, do you fit the key criteria for admission? So in other words, do you have a chance of getting in? And how do you determine that, right? One of the tools that many of these programs publish, if not all of them, is what's called a class profile. So they spell out what the demographic of the school looks like, from a diversity perspective, industries, undergrad degrees, but I think most importantly, how did they score on the GMAT, GRE? How were their undergrad grades? I really love how Kellogg lays this out for their class of 2025, because you can see the entire range for their class, right? You can see the average GPA with that range. You can see the average GMAT with the total range. You can see the median verbal GRE, the median quant GRE, along with those ranges for those components of the test. The class profiles for programs like Kellogg are going to give you an idea for how your candidacy will calibrate with the types of candidates that the program is admitting. So if your scores are within these ranges, that doesn't automatically mean you're going to be admitted or a sure thing, but you're part of the conversation, right? If your GPA is like a 2.2, for example, you're not in great shape for a program like Kellogg. So I want you to take note that, these programs, especially the M7, top 15, et cetera, these get more competitive each year. So these are the stats from class of 2025. We haven't seen the stats yet for the next incoming class. We'll see that later this year, but expect these numbers to go up. However, this is a good proxy for now. So the next consideration on this list is your professional goals. You need to understand how well your target program can facilitate your career goals and whether there's a path from where you are today to where you want to be post-graduation. So there's a couple of resources you can leverage to understand this better. So first, take a look at a program's employment report. So I'm going to pull that up in a second. There's a ton of great information in each of these employment reports that's going to help you understand who recruits at the program, which areas the students focus on in terms of industry and function, and what they get paid. Next, importantly, learn about the Career Management Center, or whatever it is called, at your programs of interest, and learn about, the relationships with recruiting companies. How many companies come every year? What other resources do they have, like mentorship programs, especially if you are recruiting for roles off campus, right? You might need to avail yourself of more of those types of resources. So let's take a look at some examples. This is a look at the Wharton class of 2023 full-time class and their 2024 internship class. As you can see here, the cohort gravitates heavily toward financial services and consulting roles. Wharton, as you may know already, has a really strong reputation rather, for financial services. Some may say it's the best program in the world for finance. However, is it the only school where you can land a finance job? Absolutely not. You'll just find a strong concentration of interested students at Wharton. Next, if you're looking at a program like Wharton, here's where you would find Career Management Center information, right? You want to understand how your job search process is supported. Find out what resources are available beyond just like the standard job boards, right? I mentioned mentorship programs, continuing relationship with the school. That is even more important these days with the dynamic hiring environment, right? Some people find themselves out of a job a couple years past graduation and need to re-engage with the program. So take a longer lens and understand, what might be available to you once you have graduated as well. Let's talk about curriculum and programming. I want you to make sure that your target program has the right offerings in your area of interest. So here I'm talking about electives, programs, concentration certificates, experiential learning opportunities, and more. You can start learning about these aspects online, but make sure that you follow up with current students to learn more firsthand. So here's an example of how one program has laid this out really well. I love how Fuqua at Duke University talks about their offerings. So first, there's a section that outlines the curriculum, including core courses and electives. You want to get an understanding of, what are the required classes. If you have experience in some of those areas, you do have the opportunity to waive them and take more electives. Next, there's a section for concentrations and certificates. So Fuqua has a number of areas of concentration, and they also offer a couple certificates in finance and in healthcare. There's a separate section on their site for experiential learning. So if you are looking to get practical experience, say with, liaising with the company, consulting with the company, Fuqua has a program for that, and you can read all about it and of course learn from students about that too. And importantly, I think global opportunities. These are popular among many of the top programs. And if it's important to you, definitely make sure that your target programs offer something like this that you're interested in, whether it's a practical experience, whether it's an exchange for, a term or longer. This is just really a brief overview of the types of things that you can explore in terms of curriculum, programming, and other learning opportunities. but definitely supplement your research online by talking with people who have actually gone through the program. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about culture. So some prospective students are really dialed into the type of student culture they're seeking, whereas some others are less focused on it. But I do think that it's important that everyone consider this when selecting programs to apply to. So think about the type of environment that you thrive in and what you desire from your business school experience. Do you want to be in a highly collaborative cohort, like, what Duke is known for example, or would you prefer to join a more competitive program? What is the overall vibe that you're looking for? You really have to talk with people to learn more about this. So I recommend that you start with info sessions, then graduate to coffee chats, and then one-on-one conversations with current students, because that's going to help you gain a behind-the-scenes perspective on how the cohort operates, right? And you're going to form an opinion on what may be best for you. So some students really gravitate toward that team-oriented culture that we see at Team Fuqua and Kellogg, for example. Others might go in a different direction. And this is a totally personal choice that should align with who you are, how you prefer to learn and collaborate. And there's often a top choice for many candidates, but again, keep your mind open to other possibilities and similar programs. So remember the client I told you about earlier, she's really bought into that Kellogg culture, but she will certainly thrive at HBS this year as well. Along the lines of culture, I want you to think about environment. And I think some candidates think this is a superficial consideration, but it's really important. So ask yourself, are you a city guy or gal or a country mouse? Are you willing to change things up and try something new? It is really okay to have a preference here. And it's okay if you don't want to pack up your life for 2 years and move into the woods. It's better to know that now rather than spend countless hours on your MBA application along with an application fee to learn that later down the road. So I do recommend that you take the time to network with programs and really understand their distinct environments. So on the one hand, attending CBS or Stern in New York City, it's an entirely different experience than moving to Hanover, New Hampshire, where Tuck is located. That's the picture in the middle. It's also a very different experience than going to Westwood in Los Angeles, which is on the right side, to attend UCLA. All of these places are great, right? But they have their pros and cons, and you have to learn more and think about what's going to work for you and where you want to be after school. This is a 2-year investment, and it's really not worth being miserable for those 2 years. So think about what you like and what you're willing to try and where you'd like to invest your time. And the final item on this list of considerations is the alumni network. So let's face it, you are going to be an alum of your MBA program for much longer than you'll be a student. So it's important to take that broad perspective, right? That long lens on your decision for this very reason. Do some digging on the alumni network to understand how large and engaged it really is. So find out, do alums have a strong presence regionally, nationally, internationally? What's important to you based on where you intend to be? How active and connected are the program's alums? And how willing are they to take your call, right? So the cohort at Tuck, for example, very supportive or very willing to take a call from a classmate. But I can tell you not all of the cohorts or alums operate in that same way. So there's plenty of ways to learn more. I'd recommend you take a look at club pages, talk to current students, alums, review employment data to understand where alums relocate following graduation. And also check out the alumni cohorts on the school pages on LinkedIn. So a lot of people underestimate this, but the value of the MBA degree is in the relationships you make with the people in your cohort and that alumni network that you join. So really encourage you to choose wisely. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I talked a lot about engaging with, current students, mentioned alums too, and I think it's worth just taking a couple minutes to talk about the best way to network with MBA programs. I talked about networking with admissions, attending events, and, connecting with people. Let's dive into what that looks like. So first, attending admissions events should be your gateway to the research process. You're going to find numerous opportunities online on program websites. So here's an example of upcoming events at Berkeley Haas. Virtual events, just like the one we're doing today, are extremely easy ways to get information and should be a great introduction to the program, their admissions process, and their offerings. But I encourage you not to stop there. Even more valuable is when you can connect with people. So I'm going to cover that next. If you're not familiar with the idea of student ambassadors, you can pretty much Google a target program plus MBA plus student ambassadors and find a page like this one. So this is from Darden, University of Virginia, Darden. And these are the people who have raised their hands on behalf of the admissions office to talk with prospective students just like you. So I recommend filtering them by things you have in common, careers, interests, country of origin, and more, whatever's important to you, and ask them for a few minutes of their time. Schedule a call to learn about their experience. I have 3 tips on this. When you contact them, ask for 15 minutes of time. This is an easy commitment, and many students will lend you, a few more minutes if they're enjoying the conversation. Number 2, tee up some questions asking about that student's specific experiences with the program. People who have volunteered to be admissions student ambassadors, rather, they love talking about their experiences. They're generally happy with their choice, and you're going to learn a lot by how they talk about their experiences. And the third thing, finally, ask pointed questions to elicit information from them that you're not going to be able to find elsewhere. So for example, ask them about their favorite course. Ask them what they wished they knew before starting the program, or what pleasantly surprised them about the experience. If they're in a similar career path as you, ask them about the recruiting experience and what they'd recommend for someone in your position. These are often the most valuable touch points that a program can have with prospective students, and they'll provide you with the most valuable information that you're going to use later in your application process. You're going to use it either, in the essays or in the interview itself. So definitely don't miss this opportunity. And the final big item on our list is diagnosing and addressing your perceived weaknesses. As I mentioned earlier, I'm talking about this now because you still have some time to do something about these things. If you address these in August, it's too late, right? So we're mid-May. You have time to take steps to address some of these weaknesses. So here's a few common weaknesses that I'm talking about, and I'm going to walk through some diagnoses for each of these. Starting with low test scores. So if you are struggling with the GMAT, I encounter this a lot with my clients who just keep hitting a wall with the GMAT and, hit a plateau with their score. They cannot rise to the level they need for their target programs. I'd recommend switching up tests, either the GR or EA, or trying another prep resource. So if you're already taking, say, target test preps self-paced course, maybe you need a few hours with the tutor to really fine-tune where you need help. So there's a few options, but again, like, you have time. I got a question in the chat here. On average, what is considered a low GPA? Generally, if you are below the average, right, or if you are very close to the low end, you might want to offset that. And I'll talk about the ways, right? So low GPA, typically, if someone is below a 3, for example, I recommend the following. You can't really change much about your undergraduate record. However, I would recommend that you use the optional essay to describe what was happening in your life then. You know, some people have encountered challenges with their own personal situation, with their family. If they want to discuss that, definitely let the admissions committee know in the optional essay. However, you can take additional coursework to create what we call an alternative transcript. If you have no quant coursework in your background, or you're dealing with a low GPA or some Ds and Fs, take some pre-MBA courses. I like the options offered by UC Berkeley, UCLA Extension. There's others out there, but find something that's graded by a real academic institution. Focus on quant topics and get an A. I see some great questions in the chat. I'm going to circle back to these, but keep them coming. Next two, if you have few to no volunteer opportunities and extracurricular activities, as I mentioned earlier, the admissions committee is really looking to meet the whole candidate and understand how you're going to contribute to the cohort. So evidence of prior involvement is crucial. You still have time to revisit a past volunteer experience or extracurricular activity and step it up. And if you think that looks superficial, it's better than having nothing at all to talk about, because there will be questions on the form asking what you do with your time outside of work. If you're hard pressed to find something to get involved with, build on past experiences and interests, or find something in your workplace. There'll be more continuity with something from the past, and you might be more likely to stick with it than if you search for something outside of your interests. So that's just a tip for extracurriculars and volunteering. And the final one, if you have no business experience, you're a non-traditional candidate like me and some of the others in this class, I recommend that you take at least one course to demonstrate you're serious about the MBA. Again, a graded course offered by a real institution. Focus on quant, get an A. So I know that was a lot to tackle, but hopefully this was helpful at this stage in your process. And I'm going to transition over to the Q&A section, so be sure to use that chat feature. As you think of questions and wonder how you might be able to contact me, use this QR code to request a free consultation. You can connect with me or another member of our team to discuss your situation and how we can help you. So I have that information on this slide as well, and we do have an offer if you do decide to move forward with the package. I'll leave this up as I answer questions, because I see a number of good ones in here and want to make sure I tackle as many as I can. So let me dive in. Here's a question about years of experience. How heavily is years of experience weighed? Is 2 to 3 years accepted? Yes, it is. So you'll see that the average among many top programs is 5 to 6, but keep in mind that's an average. I've worked with candidates with 10 or more years of experience. So when you think about how an average is calculated, there are some people on the lower end of the experience. The admissions committee really isn't focused on one single number. They're focused on the quality of your experience. Have you driven impact? Have you demonstrated leadership? And, is this the right time for you to pursue an MBA? If you have a compelling case for that, they will take that into account, right? It's not just about hitting that average number. Another question about GPA. If you have a bachelor's and master's before applying to MBA programs, which GPA would they take more seriously, or would they be evenly weighted? Depends on your course of study. I would say typically admissions committees tend to have a more recency bias to the things you've done professionally and academically. So ideally, your master's performance is strong, but if you were working at the same time or had other complications, you can discuss that in the optional essay. I wouldn't say there's like a hard and fast rule on the weighting of one or the other. And I think it will also depend on, the relative rigor of these programs too and what you studied. What are my thoughts on applying to an MBA with your partner or wife? Lots of students do this, and there is consideration from the admissions committee. Like, this is an actual question in the application, whether you are applying with the partner. So I'm all for it. And I know that the admissions committee does, everything they can to accommodate partners who are trying to start the program at the same time and be somewhere at the same time. So, yeah, I would encourage it. Have I had any candidates with the 3.2 and GPA, I'm guessing, and 145 EA get admitted to a top program? Yeah, absolutely. Like, these are the types of stats that do get into top programs. I will say it's like not always the easiest. You have to over-index on some other areas, right? The 3.2 typically is on the, lower end of the range for some top programs. 145 EA can be as well. So I really, work with candidates to make sure that the other aspects of the candidacy are strong. What do I think prevents most candidates from submitting their best applications? Oh, this is a great question. I think it is the lack of time and thoughtfulness in the application. Like, it is May right now. This is such a great time to get started. You've got plenty of time to do some introspection, really understand the programs that are right for you, and build out your case for attending an MBA. I get some people where I always, every year, get people who come to me in August for round 1, December for round 2, in a panic because, they haven't spent time doing this work, and they're really trying to rush their applications. Can those people be successful in the process? They can, but there's a lot of benefit to, spending the time to really understand and foolproof your story and really understand the programs to put your best foot forward. So, mistakes can happen when you're in a rush, and, websites can crash too, right? Like, people really do wait up into the literal last minute to submit. And, when a site crashes and they haven't submitted their application, they're out of luck and they get pushed into the next round. So that's what I really hope to avoid for all of my clients. Another question about extracurriculars. So it's been 8 years since I've been out of school. Do you have recommendations for extracurriculars for people who have been out of school for a while? I don't really base extracurriculars on someone's tenure in the workforce. It's really more like, what are you interested in doing? What are you going to stick with? What gives you joy? Those are the things that you should be pursuing because, they're authentic to who you are and what you're interested in. I would not recommend someone just pursue something because they think it looks good on an application. Like, yes, you should pursue something to have something to talk about, but not, any specific area. I think you should really lean into what you're already interested in doing and who you're interested in potentially volunteering with. Another question, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on my EA score. I'm wondering how much time you recommend work on essays. As soon as applications open for your target programs, sign up. That does not obligate you to apply, but you start getting, on the mailing list for these programs. You can learn more through the info sessions, and you can get into the application and really understand the components, right? I would say my typical clients work on essays it depends on when we start working together, right? It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. Some people try to rush them in a month. It's possible, but I wouldn't recommend it. Good question. Can you expand on what you would consider a non-traditional candidate? Anything outside consulting, finance, or referring to teachers, service workers, etc. Yeah, good question. Yeah, I would consider anyone a non-traditional candidate who is not going into or not coming from one of the traditional business functions like finance, consulting, marketing, operations, in a business job. So absolutely teachers, service workers. I have worked with people across the spectrum, nurses, doctors, you name it, who can find a home in business school. So definitely don't let that traditional profile scare you away. How do admissions feel about taking business classes like accounting at a local community college as a more affordable option? Is this option viewed unfavorably by admissions? Absolutely not. So if you're the type of person who wants to learn in person and take an accounting class, take a finance class, etc., yeah, take it at the community college, get an A, right? Love that option for you. And no, it's more about demonstrating that you can master the material than taking an HBX course, right? So I think that's a great option too. Is 8 years of professional experience too much? Not at all. I just worked with a candidate who had more than that and got into Ross in round 3, which is really difficult. So 8 years is not. You may see in your MBA, program networking that some programs are a little more like receptive to candidates with more experience. One that comes to mind is Columbia Business School. However, again, we're looking at averages 5 to 6 years, so 8 years is not completely out of the realm at all. Is it better to aim for an average GRE score, even if I'm scoring 10 points below the average? Is this factor in material? It's hard to isolate just your score without knowing other components of your candidacy, right? Because if I know your whole picture, your GPA, your goals, your professional achievements, and so forth, I might have a stronger opinion on retake the test versus focus on other areas. When does information about the applications come out? When can I start working on the essays? I would say in the next month or two that they would be all open. So hang tight. I would not recommend working on the essays in earnest right now. The reason for that is I had a candidate who worked on Kellogg last year. They changed them and we had to redo them. Thankfully, the questions were somewhat similar. We were able to kind of rework what she had started on, but I don't want you to waste your time on something that might not be asked next year. So, there are other things that you can be working on in the process while you wait for the applications to come out. In my experience, how heavily weighted are the letters of recommendation? They're important because they are a third party perspective on how you perform, on your professional potential, on your ability to contribute. I wouldn't say there's a hard and fast rule for weighting. And unfortunately, MBA admissions committees are going to say, yes, they're important, but they're not going to give you hey, it's 20%. It'd be nice if they did, but that's not going to happen. But they want to understand that you've made a difference in your professional environment and that, you have what it takes to manage the rigors of the program and of course, succeed beyond the program. Is starting a business, side business considered an extracurricular? I like that. Yeah, I do think that's a good extracurricular. Not everyone has to start a business. Not everyone has to be an entrepreneur, but if you're already doing that already, that's great. What is a good cadence for meeting with an admissions consultant if we're looking to apply round 1? My clients who are applying round 1, I'm meeting with every other week. Right now, we're a little far out to meet weekly, so every other week works great for us. As a traditional candidate, how can I set myself apart from traditional candidates? I get this question a lot too, because I work with more traditional candidates than I do non-traditional candidates. And the answer is different for everyone, kind of depending on maybe your upbringing, your perspectives, your extracurriculars, your volunteering maybe. Hard because I don't know you to give a nuanced response, but that's what I help candidates do, is really dig deep and understand who they are and how they can tell their story to make sure they're just not blending into a sea of other consultants, for example. I'm at 2 years currently of work experience. How seriously will they consider the 3rd year I would have accrued by the start of classes? They'll consider it similarly to the years you have. Obviously the admissions committee at this point can only learn about your achievements for 2 years in the workforce, but by the time you matriculate, you'll have had 3. So I think, it's important for candidates who are, on the younger end, right, have fewer years of work experience to demonstrate the maturity, the readiness for the program, and just the logic of how that story makes sense, right? Why is it important for you to get an MBA, and why is it now? This is a good question. Is it a good idea, or good or bad idea, to mention launching an unsuccessful startup in an application? I love this. So people think that they have to talk about victories and every success that they've had, but some of these application questions are going to challenge you and make you uncomfortable and talk about your failures. And my guess is, if your experience is anything like mine, you've learned more from your failures than you have your successes. So this is probably a great topic for an essay or for an interview question. So, as long as you have, learned and grown from the experience, I think it could be a great demonstration of like humility and, and learning too, right? Is there a deadline for target test prep to stop accepting requests for a comprehensive admissions consulting package for round 1? Not that I'm aware of it, just when we get down to the wire, right? In August, you're going to get less value for the comprehensive package, right? The early signups really get the value of just the unlimited engagement, right? So I guess the only limitations that you would have in August would be that, you have less time with your consultant, and also, our consultants might be at capacity too. So that's something to think about. When you recommend finishing your GMAT, et cetera, or sorry, when do you recommend finishing your GMAT, et cetera, and focusing on applications? Do you see people work on them simultaneously? I do see people working on them simultaneously. I think it's really hard. So if you can finish your test, do it as soon as possible. And I know I didn't spend a lot of time on that today, but if you are already in a target test prep program, for example, take your test, get that out of the way as soon as you can, so that when the applications come out, you can focus on that part of the process. It's more fun for most people. Question about letters of recommendations. Who should you approach? A high school teacher, college professor, work boss? Most applications or most MBA programs prefer your current supervisor. You're really looking for a professional recommendation. So there might be some cases where you're not able to get one from your current supervisor, and they're understanding of that. So, they'll ask you for a past supervisor, or if you're in kind of a different business structure, maybe it's a client, something like that. But they're really interested in learning about you as a professional. So college professors reaching too far back, and certainly high school would be as well. Question about consulting in the energy sector. Is it more likely to get accepted with a niche application category of energy compared to consulting? I think so. I think this is a differentiator for you. I don't know enough about your background to say for sure, but it's going to be pretty clear when you talk about your projects in energy on your resume that you've got, very specific and differentiated experience. If I can make a comparison, I work with a lot of consultants who are trying to differentiate themselves, right? And I had one this past season who was in the transportation industry. And, he had a solid candidacy, but nothing was really like jumping off the page. And I think his transportation industry really helped set him apart, because he had a very specific goal to continue with that post MBA, and it was like nothing else, the AdCom would have seen otherwise. Let's see. If I've not started studying for the GMAT, should I wait till the following year, or can I do it in time? This really depends on your commitments that you have in your life. And otherwise, it's hard for me to say, right? Some people have very demanding jobs and have a hard time fitting in studying for the test and meeting the demands of the application. However, some people get it done, right? Some people are very motivated by a deadline. So I can't answer that fully, but I do see people who are starting with the test now, and they work on the application in tandem, and it works out for them. So I don't want to say no, and it will all depend on your individual circumstance for this one. Do certifications play any effect in an application? it depends, you know, if you have like, if you're CPA, if you're CFA, like, you know, some of the more difficult ones will help you demonstrate your quant aptitude, will help you waive some of the foundational courses as well at your MBA program. So yeah, I think they can help, you know, if it's like, you know, some certification not related to business, it might be interesting, but not relevant. So that all goes to say, you know, it depends. I think I've covered all of them. Looks like there's this one more recommendation letter question. This person's considering asking his or her manager and colleague from previous company, what are my insights? Manager for sure. Colleague from previous company, that's kind of like a more individualized conversation that I would have with my client. So not sure, I would have to understand more about the relationship with that person and what that person you know would evaluate you on. Oh, we've one more question. When do you recommend a client to pursue executive MBA versus full-time, part-time? This really depends. You know, I mentioned that client who got into Ross round 3, and he's definitely on the higher end of years of experience. Like he could have easily gotten into the, you know, exec program, but he's someone who really wanted that full-time experience and happened to already live in the area and just, you know, be a great fit for the full-time program. So I do work with candidates who, you know, they could go either way. And sometimes in the admissions process, the adcom will reach out and say, like, we really like you, we like your experience, but you know, you might be a fit for the exec or part-time program. And, you know, that's something to think about. It depends on, you know, what experience you're looking for. And, you know, I will say, if you're not quite competitive with one of the full-time programs of a certain brand, the part-time and executive programs can be less competitive from an admission standpoint. So you might have better chances to get in if all your other criteria line up. So there's no hard and fast rule on that, but you know, a little bit of nuance too. How different is round 1 from round 2? Get this question a lot. This person says they won't likely be able to complete the best GMAT score for round 1. So what I recommend is that you apply when your application is the strongest. The reason I said earlier is to try to get applications in round 1 is because, like, depending on where you get in on round 1, or, you know, the feedback that you get from admits, wait lists, or dings from round 1, you can then decide what you want to do for round 2. That becomes more difficult if you're starting with round 2 and then pivoting for round 3, because round 3 is very competitive at most of the programs. That said, if you're not ready for round 1, if your GMAT's not dialed in for your target programs, then it might not make sense. And, you know, in this scenario, might make sense to apply in round 2. So these have all been awesome questions. Thank you so much for hanging around for so many of them. I hope this was valuable to you. You know, hit me up on the QR code if you're interested in talking more, and we will be publishing this on YouTube, so you'll have access to the video as well. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your night.